20 days in the hospital. I went to my son's house. He said, "We want privacy, Mom." It wasn't the 20 days I spent in the hospital that broke me. It wasn't the surgeon's sterile warnings or the endless nights staring at a cracked ceiling. It was 3 words, spoken by my only son through a crack in his own front door. "Get a hotel." The door clicked shut, and in that moment, I understood everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The rain in Maple Ridge doesn't just fall, it attacks. It was a cold, driving downpour that soaked through my coat the moment I stepped out of the taxi. Each drop felt like a tiny needle against my skin. My hand, still weak, trembled as it gripped the handle of my cane. The other pulled a small suitcase, the plastic hospital bracelet still dangling from the handle like a pathetic party favor. This was freedom, I had told myself. 20 days inside, and now I was free. I stood before my son Derek's house. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. A cube of glass and steel that had always felt cold to me, even on the sunniest Seattle days. Tonight it looked like a fortress. As I hobbled up the slick stone walkway, a motion sensor light snapped on, painting me in a sterile, white glare. It felt less like a welcome and more like an interrogation. I pressed the doorbell. The chime was a soft, melodic tune that was completely at odds with the storm and the hammering in my chest. I waited, listening to the rain drum against the metal awning. I could hear faint sounds from inside music, perhaps a television. Then, footsteps. The door didn't swing open. It opened a crack, just a few inches. Derek's face appeared in the gap. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking sweater I'd never seen before. "Mom," he said. His voice was flat. "Derek?" I tried to smile, but my lips felt stiff. "The hospital discharged me this afternoon, a bit earlier than we thought." He didn't move to open the door wider. He just stared at me, his gaze flickering from my face to the suitcase by my feet. A shadow shifted behind him, deep within the warm light of the house. I saw the silhouette of a woman, her arms crossed in a posture of absolute ownership. "Brielle, I just need a place for a few nights," I said, my voice starting to sound desperate even to my own ears. "Just until I'm stronger on my feet." His eyes flicked back toward the shadow, then returned to me, devoid of warmth. "Mom, we need our privacy," he said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the downpour like shards of glass. "You can get a hotel for a while." For a second, the world went silent. The rain, the wind, my own breathing, it all stopped. I just stared at him, at the son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and I saw a stranger. Then, without another word, he closed the door. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. I was left alone on the porch, drenched and illuminated by that single, unforgiving light. The smell of cold rain mixed with the faint antiseptic scent still clinging to my clothes. My hand gripping the cane trembled violently now. But my eyes were dry. Not a single tear fell. The shock was so profound it froze them in my head. I wasn't standing on my son's porch feeling sorry for myself. I was standing there, committing every single detail to memory. The cold metal of the doorknob, the precise shade of gray of the door, the sound of his voice when he cast me out, the finality in the click of the lock. I wasn't crying. I was preparing. 3 days before my son left me standing in the rain, I was waging a quiet war from a hospital bed. It was day 17. The world had shrunk to the 4 beige walls of my room at Maple Ridge General. Time didn't pass here. It dripped, measured by the steady, metronomic beep of the heart monitor beside me and the slow creep of weak sunlight across the linoleum floor. My body felt like a borrowed, ill-fitting coat, but my mind, cleared of the post-surgery fog, was a fortress, and it was time to check the defenses. I pushed the button to raise the head of the bed, my breath catching with a faint, sharp pain in my chest. Reaching for the nightstand, I ignored the plastic cup of water and the untouched bowl of lime jello. My target was a small, black Moleskine notebook and a fine-point pen, my tools, as familiar to my hand as a hammer is to a carpenter. Arthur had always joked that my love language was a well-balanced spreadsheet. He wasn't wrong. I flipped to a fresh page. The beep of the monitor was my soundtrack as I wrote, my handwriting still a little shaky but ruthlessly clear. 1. Call Gavin, my neighbor, my friend, the first line of defense. He held a spare key and, more importantly, a spare copy of the documents that mattered. 2. Check trust safety lock. Arthur and I had designed our estate plan like a military operation. The safety lock was a protocol we'd devised with our lawyer, Rowan. It was a sequence of notifications that had to be triggered in a specific order before any major changes could be made to the trust. It was meant to protect us from duress, from influence, from a moment of weakness. It was meant to protect us from the unthinkable. Contact Rowan Piperage, our lawyer, the final gatekeeper. I put the pen down, my work for the moment done. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. Arthur had been a brilliant, sometimes ruthless businessman. He knew that wolves didn't always howl. Sometimes they smiled and brought you flowers in the hospital. Always be the most prepared person in the room, Loretta, he used to say. That's the only armor that truly fits. A soft knock at the door broke my concentration. Sister Helene, the head of the hospital's volunteer group, peeked in, her face framed by a simple white wimple. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. Just checking in, Loretta. You look like you're plotting a corporate takeover, she said, her voice a warm, gentle hum that instantly lowered the room's tension. I managed a small smile. Just balancing the books, sister. She came closer, placing a fresh bottle of water on my nightstand. Her gaze fell on my notebook, then back to my face. She hesitated for a moment, a flicker of concern crossing her features. Loretta, she began, her voice dropping slightly. I shouldn't be saying this, but be careful. You've been on some very strong medication. Sedatives, pain relief. They can leave you muddled. I looked at her, waiting. My advice? She continued, meeting my eyes directly. Don't sign anything. Not a thing. Not a get-well card. Not a delivery receipt. Nothing. Not until your head has been clear for at least 48 hours. People can take advantage when you're not 100%. The words hung in the sterile air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was a warning shot, fired from an unexpected quarter. I simply nodded, the gesture feeling more significant than any words I could have spoken. I understood completely. Thank you, sister, I said, and I meant it. She gave my hand a light squeeze and was gone, leaving a wake of quiet concern behind her. The room felt emptier now, the monitors beep louder. I reached into the drawer of the nightstand and pulled out my wallet. From a worn leather flap, I slid out a photograph of Arthur. It was taken at the cabin on Arrow Lake, maybe 10 years ago. He was standing on the dock, laughing, the sun catching the silver in his hair. His eyes, even in a fading photograph, were sharp and intelligent, always seeing 3 steps ahead. He had built an empire for us, a life of comfort and security, but he had also seen the sharks that swam in those waters. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb, the crinkled paper a familiar comfort. He had been gone for 2 years, but his presence, his planning, was woven into the very fabric of my life. This trust, these legal structures, they were the last things he had built. A final fortress to protect me. I held the picture closer, my voice a whisper that was lost beneath the beeping of the machine. I hope what you left behind is enough to protect me, Arthur, I murmured. I hope our planning was enough. I had a plan for my recovery. A simple, logical plan. I would be discharged in a few days. I would call Derek, and I would stay in the guest room at his house, just for a week or 2, until I was steady again. It was the natural, obvious step. It was the one part of the plan I hadn't thought to bulletproof. The one vulnerability I never saw coming. The one part I foolishly assumed was built not on legal clauses and safety locks, but on love. The first thing I noticed when I walked into Gavin Shu's apartment was the warmth. It wasn't just the heat from the radiators. It was the smell of dark roast coffee, old books, and the faint, pleasant scent of lemon oil on polished wood. It was the antithesis of the cold, sterile world I had just been ejected from the hospital, and then my son's front porch. I had called him from a 24-hour diner, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, my hospital suitcase dripping onto the floor beside me. He answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way," was all he said. Now, sitting at his heavy oak dining table, a steaming ceramic mug warming my hands, I felt the icy shell around me begin to thaw, just enough to speak. Gavin sat opposite me, quiet and patient. At 71, he still had the observant stillness of the insurance investigator he used to be. His face was a roadmap of a life lived, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He hadn't pressed me for details. He simply made coffee, handed me a mug, and waited. He told me to get a hotel, I said. The words came out flat, stripped of all emotion. I was an accountant delivering a final audit. Derek. He and Brielle needed their privacy. Gavin didn't offer sympathy. He didn't say, "I'm so sorry, Loretta," or "That's terrible." He just gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if I'd just confirmed a fact he had already suspected. That, more than anything, made me feel seen. "And the locks?" he asked. I didn't try my key. I came straight to the diner. "Ali booze." "Good," he said. "No confrontation. Smart." He rose from the table and walked over to a handsome filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He returned with a thick, blue folder and laid it on the table between us. He opened it with methodical precision. "Arthur was a planner," Gavin said, his voice a calm baritone. "And you, Loretta, are no slouch yourself. We have a few things working in our favor." He slid a document across the table. The heading read, "Enhanced Life Estate Deed." It was the Lady Bird deed for my house on Maple Ridge. "This is our foundation," he explained, tapping a paragraph with his index finger. "It states that the house passes directly to Derek upon your death, avoiding probate. It's clean, it's simple, but this is the part that matters right now." He pointed to another clause. "It also grants you, the owner, full, undiluted rights to the property for the duration of your life. You can sell it, mortgage it, burn it to the ground if you want to. Derek's name is on the deed, but for now, it's just a placeholder. He has zero legal authority over that property until you're gone." I nodded, remembering the long afternoon Rowan Piperidge had spent explaining this to us years ago. It had felt like a morbid, abstract exercise back then. Now, it was a shield. "But this," Gavin said, a glint in his eye as he pulled out a second, smaller document stapled to the first. "This is our ace in the hole for today." It was a one-page addendum. He slid it closer. The title was innocuous. Guest Occupancy Clarification. Arthur called this the No Free Lunch Clause, Gavin said. "It legally stipulates that any family member residing in the house for more than 30 consecutive days without a formal lease agreement is classified as a tenant at will. As the owner, you have the right to terminate that tenancy with 30 days' notice. But more importantly, a tenant has no right to deny the landlord you access to the property." He leaned forward. "He can't change the locks, Loretta. He can't tell you to get a hotel. Legally, he's the guest. You are the master of the house." I stared at the paper, at the neat black ink of my and Arthur's signatures at the bottom. A wave of profound gratitude for my late husband washed over me. He had seen a future I couldn't, and he had built a wall to protect me from it. "So what now?" I asked, my voice still a monotone. "Now, we call a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy to escort you. We re-establish your residency. We play by the book, every step of the way." Gavin's confidence was a balm. He made it sound so simple, a checklist to be completed. He refilled my coffee mug, then leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. The legal part of the conversation was over. Now came the human part. "You know," he said, his gaze drifting past me toward the rain-streaked window, "I had a friend once. A good man. His son also trusted the wrong person, got involved with a woman who made him feel like he could conquer the world." His voice changed. The sharp, analytical edge was gone, replaced by something heavier, tinged with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. His eyes, which were so focused a moment ago, were now distant, looking at a memory only he could see. "She convinced the boy he was an investment genius," Gavin continued quietly. "Had him sign power of attorney over to her to manage his portfolio. By the time the smoke cleared, she'd remortgaged his father's house and funneled the money into a shell corporation. The kid lost everything, broke his father's heart." He fell silent, swirling the coffee in his mug. The investigator was gone, and for a split second, I saw a father marked by a hidden, indelible scar. The story wasn't about a friend. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. He brought his eyes back to meet mine, the professional mask firmly back in place. But I had seen what was behind it. People like that, he said, his voice once again level and firm. They count on you being emotional. They count on you making a scene. We're not going to give them the satisfaction. We are going to be calm, prepared, and utterly relentless. I picked up my mug. The warmth spread through my fingers, and for the first time since that door clicked shut, I felt something other than shock. I felt the cold, hard spark of a fight beginning, and I knew I wasn't fighting it alone. Gavin's story about his friend hung in the air between us, a ghost of a warning. It wasn't the legal documents or his strategic advice that solidified my resolve. It was the raw, hidden pain in his eyes. It made me remember. It threw my mind back 48 hours to a quiet, antiseptic-scented hallway in Maple Ridge General. The doctors had encouraged me to walk, and I was making my first supervised trip from my room to the nurse's station and back, pushing a squeaking metal walker. Each step was a small victory. The hallway was nearly deserted, caught in the mid-afternoon lull between lunch trays and visiting hours. As I was shuffling back toward my room, I saw Sister Helene emerge from the small chapel at the end of the hall. When she saw me, she stopped. The usually serene smile on her face was replaced by a look of profound conflict. She glanced down the empty corridor, then walked toward me, her steps quick and quiet. "Loretta," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you spare a moment?" She guided me to a small, empty waiting alcove with two uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs. I lowered myself into one, my muscles protesting. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood before me, wringing her hands slightly. "I find myself in a moral quandary," she began, looking me straight in the eye. "And I believe you are at the center of it." From the deep pocket of her gray cardigan, she pulled a small silver object. It was a cheap digital voice recorder, the kind a student might use for lectures. "I use this to record notes for my volunteers," she explained, holding it as if it were a venomous insect. "Reminders, room changes, patient requests. It's easier than writing everything down. Yesterday, after visiting you, I was in the hallway dictating a few instructions. Your son and his girlfriend were leaving your room at the same time. I put the recorder in my pocket and I must have forgotten to press stop." She took a deep breath. Later that evening, I was listening back to my notes, and I heard more than I was meant to, more than I was ever supposed to hear. My heart, which had been beating in a steady, medicated rhythm, began to pound against my ribs. "Loretta, my conscience wouldn't let me sleep if I didn't give this to you," she said, pressing the cold metal device into my palm. Her hand was trembling. "But my head is telling me this could be a legal minefield. I am not a lawyer. I don't know the laws in Washington about recording people without their consent. This might be something, or it might be nothing but trouble. Please, just be careful." She squeezed my hand, then turned and walked away, leaving me sitting in the plastic chair with the small silver recorder feeling as heavy as a brick in my hand. I pushed my walker back to my room, my mind racing. I shut the door, sank onto the edge of my bed, and fumbled to plug the cheap earbuds into the jack. I pressed play. First, I heard Sister Helene's own voice, clear and kind. "And please remember to check on Mr. Henderson in room 304. He likes to have his water pitcher refilled at exactly 4 o'clock. Then, a rustling sound, the soft click of my hospital room door closing. For a few seconds, there was just faint hallway noise. Then, voices, muffled but clear enough. One was a woman I didn't recognize, older, with a sharp, impatient tone. "Is she lucid?" the voice asked. Then came the voice I now recognized from my son's porch. Brielle. It wasn't loud, but it was slick and cold, like water freezing into ice. "Mostly," Brielle answered. "But the discharge paperwork mentions residual grogginess from the pain medication. The doctor said she'll be a bit foggy for a day or two. That's our window." A pause. I held my breath. "The moment she's discharged," Brielle's voice continued, dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, "she signs the quitclaim deed. We do it while she's still foggy from the meds, before that lawyer of hers can get to her. She'll think it's just more hospital paperwork. Quitclaim. The word wasn't just spoken, it was deployed. It landed in my ear and shot a shard of ice straight into my heart. A quitclaim deed, a document to surrender all rights to my property. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a son needing his privacy. This was a premeditated attack. A calculated theft, planned to take place when I was at my most vulnerable. I ripped the earbuds out. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to mock me. They weren't just trying to get me out of the way for a few days. They were trying to steal my house. The house Arthur and I had built. The place where I had raised my son. The shock I'd felt on Derek's doorstep was a dull ache compared to this. This was sharp. This was a betrayal so cold and precise it took my breath away. And then, Sister Helene's warning echoed in my mind. A legal minefield. I looked at the recorder in my hand. It was proof. It was their entire, vile plan laid bare. It was a silver bullet. But it was a silver bullet fired from a gun that might explode in my own hand. It was the truth, but an inadmissible truth. A weapon I couldn't legally use in a fight, but one I couldn't possibly lay down. It wasn't a silver bullet at all. It was a double-edged sword. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Rowan Piperidge's law office was a sanctuary of order in a world that had suddenly dissolved into chaos. Located in a historic downtown Seattle building, the office smelled of old leather, paper, and the quiet authority of the law. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with formidable-looking legal volumes, lined the walls. This was Rowan's domain, a place where he had untangled the messy lives of the wealthy and protected their legacies for over 30 years. It was the safest I had felt in weeks. Rowan, a man nearing 60 with a full head of silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat behind a large mahogany desk. He had been Arthur's lawyer, and then ours. He was the architect of the fortress my husband had built to protect me. Standing slightly to his right was a young man Rowan introduced as Leo Vance, a junior associate. Leo couldn't have been older than 26. He was sharp, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, with an ambitious energy that seemed to vibrate in the still air of the office. He was the new generation, the hungry wolf cub learning from the old silverback. Gavin briefed me on the situation at the house, Rowan began, his voice calm and measured. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Let's go over the battle plan. I placed the blue folder Gavin had given me on the polished desk. Leo Vance's eyes were on it instantly, like a hawk spotting its prey. As Rowan laid out the ladybird deed and the guest occupancy addendum, Leo leaned in, reading upside down, his focus absolute. This is solid, Rowan, Leo said, his voice sharp and quick. The addendum is ironclad. He's a tenant. She has every right to be there. He looked at me. But they'll have a countermove. Their lawyer, and you can bet Brielle has one on speed dial, will argue undue influence or lack of capacity. They'll say Derek was pressured into agreeing to the tenancy, or that you weren't of sound mind when you had him move in. I bristled, but Rowan held up a hand, a small smile touching his lips. He was testing the kid, and Leo was passing. A predictable move, Leo, Rowan said, nodding in approval. And one Arthur Vale anticipated from his grave. Which brings us to Exhibit C, N. He reached into a drawer and produced a single, crisp document from our file. He slid it across the desk. I recognized it immediately. The Dignity Restoration Clause, Rowan announced, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Leo picked it up, his eyes scanning it rapidly. A low whistle escaped his lips. Wow, he breathed. This is surgical. He looked at me, his professional admiration clear. This clause, Mrs. Vale, is a masterpiece. It amends the primary trust. It states that if any named beneficiary takes action that results in you being, and I quote, involuntarily removed from or denied access to your primary residence for any period exceeding 24 hours, that beneficiary's inheritance is automatically and irrevocably reduced to a token sum of $1. It's the nuclear option, Rowan added. The moment Derek refused to let you in, he essentially disinherited himself. He just doesn't know it yet. Angry. A wave of relief washed over me. It was all there. The planning, the foresight. Arthur had thought of everything. We were in control. We had them cornered. Feeling a surge of confidence, I reached into my purse. And there's more. I said, placing the small silver voice recorder on the desk. This is the nail in their coffin. Leo's eyes lit up. Rowan, however, leaned back, his expression becoming guarded. What is this, Loretta? He asked. It's a recording, I explained, my voice steady. Sister Helene from the hospital gave it to me. She accidentally recorded Brielle and her mother, Prudence, in the hallway. They're planning to have me sign a quitclaim deed right after I'm discharged, while I'm still, and I quote, foggy from the meds. Leo grinned, a flash of predatory excitement. That's it. Game over. Conspiracy to commit fraud against the elderly. That's a felony. We can hand this to the district attorney on a silver platter. Rowan didn't share his associate's enthusiasm. He picked up the recorder, held it for a moment, and then slowly connected it to his computer speakers. He played the file. The office was silent as the three of us listened to the hushed, venomous conversation. The word quitclaim echoed off the leather-bound books, a snake slithering into our sanctuary. When it was over, Leo was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. This is a slam dunk. We can ruin them with this. Rowan was silent for a long moment. He leaned forward, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me with weary eyes. He slowly shook his head. No, we can't, he said, his voice quiet but firm. The confidence in the room evaporated. What? Leo asked, his excitement deflating. Rowan, this is golden evidence. Yes, it is, Rowan agreed. It's also completely inadmissible in a court of law. Washington is a two-party consent state, Leo. It is illegal to record a private conversation without the consent of everyone involved. If we try to introduce this as evidence, not only will the judge throw it out, but he'll sanction us for even trying. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. Legally, this recording doesn't exist. The air went out of my lungs. The silver bullet I thought I held was a blank. The fortress I was sitting in suddenly felt like it was made of glass. So, it's worthless? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Rowan looked from me to his eager associate, a seasoned general calming his troops. No, he said, a strategic glint returning to his eye. It is not worthless. I said we can't use it in a court of law, but it has immense value where the rules of evidence don't apply. He tapped the recorder with his finger. We can't use this to fight their lawyers, but we can absolutely use it to fight them. The call came 2 days after my visit to Rowan's office. It was Derek. His voice on the phone was strained, laced with a forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his ears, let alone mine. Mom? Hey. Listen, things got out of hand the other night. He stammered. Brielle and I, we'd love to have you over for dinner. To talk things through, clear the air. It was the most transparent olive branch I'd ever seen. Brielle was pulling his strings, setting the stage for Act 2 of their little drama. The old me, the mother, would have been relieved. But the woman who had listened to that silver recorder, the woman who had sat in Rowan Piperidge's office, knew better. This wasn't an apology. It was an ambush. Of course, dear, I said, my voice deliberately frail. That sounds lovely. Walking into my son's house that evening felt like willingly walking into the lion's den. The sterile, modern architecture was the same, but tonight it was dressed up for a performance. Scented candles flickered on the quartz countertop. Soft jazz murmured from hidden speakers. The air was thick with the aroma of roasting basil and garlic, a desperate attempt to manufacture a sense of home. Brielle greeted me at the door with a hug that felt like a business transaction. She was dressed in a chic, cream-colored cashmere dress, looking every bit the successful financial guru. Loretta, I'm so glad you came, she said, her smile perfectly polished. We were so worried about you. I'll bet you were, I thought. Dinner was a masterclass in tension. Derek, looking miserable, kept my wineglass filled, his conversation darting nervously between the weather and local sports. He was a terrible actor. Brielle, on the other hand, was a pro. She guided the conversation, asking about my recovery, complimenting the hospital staff, and painting a picture of a devoted couple who had simply been overwhelmed. It was all smoke and mirrors. After the main course, as Derek was clearing the plates, Brielle made her move. Loretta, she began, her tone shifting from social to serious. She slid a handsome, leather-bound folder across the table toward me. We've been thinking a lot about your future, about making sure you're taken care of, properly. So, I took the liberty of drawing something up. She opened the folder. The top page read, Lifetime Care and Residency Agreement. My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral, curious. It's a simple agreement, really, she explained, her voice smooth as silk. It grants you residency here, for life. In exchange, it gives me a limited power of attorney to manage your financial affairs, paying bills, managing investments, that sort of thing. It's to take the burden off your shoulders, to formalize our commitment to you. It was brilliant in its wickedness. It wasn't a quitclaim deed. It was something that sounded like a gift. But I saw the legal hooks hidden in the dense paragraphs. It would give her control. She was trying to get through the back door what she'd failed to get at the front. I slowly paged through the document, pretending to read, my mind racing. I needed to stall. I needed to understand her motive. What was the endgame? As if reading my mind, Brielle leaned forward, her expression a mask of earnest admiration. You know, I've always been so impressed by what Arthur built, she said, her voice dropping respectfully. I was reading an old article about his acquisition of the old timber portfolio back in the 90s. A real David and Goliath story. I looked up. Oh? Yes, she continued, warming to her subject. She was trying to connect with me, to show me she was worthy of managing his legacy. The way he outmaneuvered that smaller family firm, the Kincaids, I think it was. He leveraged their debt in such a masterful way. It was a hostile takeover, but a brilliant one. A classic Arthur Vale move. She smiled, proud of her research, and in that moment, the penny dropped. It wasn't a penny, it was an anvil. The Kincaids. My mind flashed back through decades of memories. A news clipping Arthur had briefly shown me. A rival he'd driven into bankruptcy. He hadn't been proud of it. He'd called it a necessary casualty of business. I had forgotten the name, but I had never forgotten the look on his face. And Brielle's last name wasn't Vale. It wasn't Smith or Jones. It was Kincaid. She had just told me a detail that was never published in any article. The specific leverage tactic Arthur used was a private, brutal detail, something only the people in that room or their children, nursing a lifelong grudge, would ever know. This wasn't about money. Not entirely. This was about revenge. This was a daughter settling her father's score. She wasn't just trying to steal my house. She was trying to dismantle my husband's legacy, piece by piece, using his own son as the wrecking ball. The cold, calculated cruelty of it all was breathtaking. A flicker of ice shot through me, but I let none of it show on my face. Instead, I looked up from the folder and gave her a warm, slightly tired smile. Brielle, this is very thorough, I said, my voice soft. I slowly closed the leather folder and gently pushed it back toward the center of the table, away from me. It's a lot to take in. You know, Arthur always taught me to have Rowan look over everything. Dot the I's and cross the T's, he'd say. Brielle's smile tightened by a millimeter. A flicker of frustration, instantly suppressed, passed through her eyes. She had expected me to be emotional, grateful, or perhaps overwhelmed. She hadn't expected me to be prudent. Of course, she said smoothly. Whatever makes you comfortable. The rest of the evening was a blur. I played my part, the recovering matriarch, tired from her first big outing. As I stood to leave, I let Derek help me with my coat. For a moment, I looked into my son's eyes and saw not a traitor, but a fool. A pawn in a game so much older and darker than he could ever imagine. As I drove away, the jazz music from the house faded behind me. The minefield dinner was over. I had walked through it, identified a buried bomb, and walked away without it exploding. And now, I knew exactly what kind of war I was fighting. The day after the disastrous reconciliation dinner, Gavin called me. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Meet me at 5, the old Northgate Mall parking lot. Come alone. Dusk was bleeding across the Seattle sky as I pulled my car into a space at the far end of the sprawling, cracked asphalt lot. The mall had been closed for years, a concrete skeleton waiting for demolition. A single, flickering streetlight cast long, dancing shadows. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. A few minutes later, Gavin's sensible sedan pulled in beside me. He got out, carrying a familiar blue folder, and slid into my passenger seat. The car suddenly felt very small, an island in a sea of abandoned parking spaces. "I didn't want to bring this to your house," he said, his voice low and serious. "This isn't something you leave lying around." He opened the folder on his lap. It was filled with financial statements, collection notices, and credit reports. All of them bore Derek's name. "I told you I had a friend who was an expert in asset recovery," Gavin said, which I knew was code for a private investigator he kept on retainer. "I had him do a deep dive on Derek's finances. It's not pretty, Loretta." I steeled myself. "Show me." He handed me the first sheaf of papers. It was exactly what I'd expected, only worse. Credit card statements with staggering balances, each one maxed out. A loan for a luxury SUV that was hopelessly underwater. It was a portrait of a man living far beyond his means. A man desperate to project an image of success he hadn't earned. It was foolish, reckless, and heartbreakingly predictable. "This is bad, Gavin," I said, my voice tight. "But it's just debt. We can fix this." Gavin shook his head slowly, his eyes grim in the dim light of the car. "Keep reading." He pointed to the last section of the folder. It was a single, multi-page document, a consolidated loan agreement. One large loan that had been used to pay off all the smaller, high-interest debts. It was for a staggering amount, far more than the sum of the credit cards. "He took out a consolidation loan to clean up his credit?" I asked, a sliver of hope in my voice. "Maybe he was trying to be responsible. He took out a loan." Gavin corrected me gently. "But not from a bank." He tapped the top of the page, on the line that read lender. My eyes focused on the name, printed in a clean corporate font, and the breath caught in my throat. "Arthur's Legacy Ventures, LLC." I stared at the words, a wave of nausea rolling over me. It was a desecration, a sick, twisted joke. To use my husband's name, his memory, for something like this? "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage that was starting to eclipse my sorrow. "What kind of company calls itself that?" "The kind that doesn't exist," Gavin said, his voice flat and cold as steel. He took the document from my shaking hands and pointed to the address listed beneath the name. "It's a P.O. box in Delaware. There's no office, no website, no employees." My guy checked. "Arthur's Legacy Ventures is a shell corporation, a ghost on paper, set up for the sole purpose of funneling money from one place to another, completely off the books." The pieces from the night before Brielle's calculated flattery, her intimate knowledge of the Kincaid deal, the predatory gleam in her eye slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. "The bait," I said, the realization dawning on me. "It was the bait." "Exactly," Gavin confirmed. Brielle didn't just stumble upon Derek. She profiled him. She knew he was financially irresponsible. But more than that, she knew his Achilles heel, his father's shadow. He spent his entire life feeling like he could never measure up to Arthur Vale. He tapped the loan agreement again. So she creates a company with the one name she knows he can't resist. She presents it to him as a private equity firm, an exclusive venture capital group that invests in the children of powerful men. She tells him it's his chance to build his own legacy, to prove he's his father's son. It's a custom-made trap, Loretta, and he walked right into it. I felt a profound, sickening disgust. It was a work of art, in a truly evil way. She had identified his deepest insecurity and forged it into a weapon to use against him and against me. She had him hook, line, and sinker. The loan wasn't just a loan, it was a leash. She owned him. I looked at Gavin, and in the fading twilight, I saw the same grim understanding I felt in my own heart. He wasn't just a neighbor helping out. The story he'd told me about his friend's son, it was his own story. The scar was real. He knew this enemy. "She's not just trying to take my house, is she?" I said, the question a statement. "She's trying to burn everything Arthur ever built to the ground." "Yes," Gavin said quietly. "And she's using his own son as the torch." End quote. I looked out at the darkening parking lot. The lone streetlight sputtered, then held steady. The anger I felt was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold, focused, and absolute. This was not about a house anymore. This was about defending a legacy. I was no longer just protecting myself from a con artist. I was facing a ghost from my husband's past, and she was trying to destroy my future. The discovery of Arthur's legacy ventures changed the texture of the fight. It was no longer a defensive battle to reclaim my home. It was now an offensive campaign against an enemy who had desecrated my husband's memory. In Rowan Piperidge's office, the atmosphere shifted from legal counsel to a war council. We had the truth on our side, but the truth was inadmissible. We had the law on our side, but the law was slow. We needed a new weapon. We needed a trap. "They think we're playing checkers," Rowan said, steepling his fingers on his mahogany desk. "We need to make them think they're winning the game, right up until the moment we say checkmate." His eyes drifted to Leo Vance, who was standing by the window, watching the Seattle rain streak down the glass. "Brielle thinks she's a master manipulator," Rowan continued. "People like that are blinded by their own arrogance. They always assume they're the smartest person in the room. And they always look for a weak link, a way to get inside." "Me," Leo said, turning from the window. He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact. "I'm the weak link. Young, ambitious, probably in over my head with student debt. I'm exactly the kind of person she'd try to flip." I felt a knot of apprehension tighten in my stomach. I had only just met this young man. Entrusting him with such a critical role felt like a monumental gamble. Rowan must have seen the doubt in my eyes. "Leo is one of the sharpest young lawyers I've ever seen, Loretta," he said reassuringly. "And he's a better actor than you think." The plan they devised was simple in its concept but terrifying in its execution. Leo would become the bait. I learned the details later, after the trap had been sprung. It began, as we predicted, with Brielle making her move. She didn't approach Leo at the office or send a formal email. She was too slick for that. She arranged to be at a high-end coffee shop downtown, a place frequented by the city's financial power brokers. She knew from a cursory background check that Leo went there every Tuesday morning. She made their meeting look like a coincidence. As Leo later recounted it to us, she was the picture of charm and sophistication. She recognized him from across the room, approached his table, and struck up a conversation about a recent high-profile case. Within minutes, she was dissecting his career. "Elder law is noble, Leo, truly," she'd said, stirring her macchiato. "But a mind like yours, isn't it a little like using a racehorse to pull a plow? My firm, Kincaid Asset Management, is expanding. We're looking for someone with your kind of killer instinct to head our legal acquisitions department. We're talking a different league entirely." She named a salary that was more than double what Rowan was paying him. She talked about a partnership track, a corner office, a life he had likely only dreamed of. She wasn't just offering him a job, she was offering him an identity, a way to leapfrog a decade of tedious work and become the man he so clearly wanted to be. Leo played his part to perfection. He was flattered, intrigued, and just a little bit conflicted. He spoke of his loyalty to Rowan, but let a flicker of avarice show in his eyes. He didn't accept her offer, but he didn't refuse it either. He left the door wide open, exactly as planned. He took her card and promised to think about it. The hook was set. The next phase was to reel them in. 2 days later, Leo executed the riskiest part of the plan. He got in his car to drive to a deposition and called Rowan's office. He knew with a certainty that chilled me that after their meeting, Brielle would have taken steps to monitor him. A bug on his car, a tap on his phone. It was standard procedure for a predator who needed to ensure her prey was walking into the snare. The conversation, as Rowan played the recording for me later from his own secure line, was a masterpiece of staged panic. "Rowan, it's Leo," he'd said, his voice tight with manufactured anxiety. "I'm on my way to the courthouse, but I'm worried about the Vale case. Are we sure our position is as strong as we think?" Rowan's voice on the other end was a gruff, reassuring bass. "We've been over this, Leo. Our strategy is sound." I know," Leo pressed on, selling the performance. "But everything is riding on that one clause, the dignity restoration clause. It's our entire offense. If they find a way around it, if they challenge it and win, we're left holding an empty bag. It feels like we're putting all our eggs in one basket." He had done it. He had named our trump card and painted it as our only one. He had dangled the bait right in front of their noses. "It's not a bluff, Leo," Rowan said, his tone firm, playing the part of the senior partner, calming a jittery associate. "The clause is ironclad. Just stick to the plan. Don't get rattled." He hung up. The call lasted less than a minute. Listening to it in the safety of Rowan's office, I understood the terrifying brilliance of their gambit. To Brielle and her mother, Prudence, listening in from whatever dark corner they occupied, this conversation was a gift from the heavens. It confirmed that their target's legal team was nervous. It told them that their entire case hinged on a single, specific legal provision. And, most importantly, it made them believe they had an inside man who was getting cold feet. They would be gloating now. They would be confident, arrogant, and utterly convinced that they had outsmarted the old woman and her stuffy, over-the-hill lawyer. They believed they had found my weakness. In reality, we had just shown them theirs. My house wasn't a courtroom. There were no robes, no jury box, no gavel. But that night, as I waited in my dining room, the polished oak table felt like the bar of justice, and I was about to call my own court to session. The air, thick with the scent of the vanilla candles I had lit, was heavy with anticipation. Brielle and Prudence arrived precisely at 7. They walked in not as guests, but as conquerors who had come to survey their newly acquired territory. Prudence, the Queen Mother, had an air of smug satisfaction. Brielle, the smirking princess, looked at my familiar furniture with the cold appraisal of someone already planning a renovation. They thought this was a surrender. "Loretta," Brielle said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm glad we're doing this. It's time to be practical." They took their seats at the table. Rowan sat to my right, a silent, formidable presence. Derek, my son, sat opposite me, unable to meet my eyes, his face a pale mask of guilt and anxiety. I let the silence hang for a moment before I placed the small silver voice recorder in the center of the table. "Before we discuss practicality," I said, my voice calm and even, "I believe there's something you should hear." I pressed play. Their own voices, hushed and venomous, filled the quiet room. "That's our window. The moment she's discharged, she signs the quitclaim deed. End of Tuwa." When it was over, I pressed stop. Prudence's face was unreadable, but Brielle simply laughed. A short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Is that all you have, Loretta?" she scoffed. "A sad little recording? My mother and I discussing your healthcare options? Besides, even if it were what you think it is, it's completely inadmissible. Fruit of the poisonous tree. You should fire your lawyer." She looked at Rowan, a triumphant glint in her eye. "You're right, Brielle," I said softly, and the smirk on her face widened. "It's completely useless for a court of law, but I didn't play it for a judge. I turned my gaze fully on my son. I played it for Derek." Derek flinched as if I had struck him. Rowan chose that moment to slide a single document across the table. "And in light of recent events," he said, his voice a low rumble, "Mrs. Vale has instructed me to activate the Dignity Restoration Clause of the Vale Family Trust. As of his refusal to allow his mother entry to her home, Derek's inheritance has been formally reduced to the sum of $1. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This was their victory. The house, the trust, the legacy, it was all theirs now. A slow smile spread across Brielle's face as she exchanged a triumphant look with her mother. They had played the long game and won. "You seem to think," I said, my voice cutting through their silent celebration, "that this has always been about the house." I picked up a small remote. With a soft click, a projector whirred to life, casting an image onto the blank dining room wall behind Derek. It was the incorporation document for a company, Arthur's Legacy Ventures, LLC. Brielle's smile faltered. Click. The next slide was the consolidated loan agreement, with Derek's desperate signature at the bottom. Click. The wire transfers from the shell company to his accounts. "A company with my husband's name," I said, my voice growing stronger, colder. "A company designed to appeal to a son's greatest insecurity. You didn't just offer him a loan, Brielle. You offered him a chance to be his father." I looked directly at her, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. "But the name on the incorporation papers isn't yours, is it?" I continued. "It's your mother's. A woman whose family was driven into bankruptcy by Arthur Vale nearly 30 years ago. This was never about taking care of Derek. This was about settling your father's score." The color drained from Brielle's face. Her carefully constructed house of cards was beginning to tremble. And then, it collapsed. But the final push didn't come from me. She told me. A choked sob escaped Derek's lips. He was shaking, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone. He fumbled with the screen, then pointed it at the projector. A moment later, his text messages to Brielle filled the wall. "Are you sure this is a good investment?" his text read. Her reply was a dagger. "Your father was a lion, Derek. Don't you want to be one too? This is how you prove you're better than him." The texts kept scrolling, a timeline of his seduction and manipulation. He stood up, knocking his chair over. Tears streamed down his face. "She said I could be better than him." He wept, his voice breaking. "Better than Dad." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a bottomless, soul-crushing shame. "Mom, I'm so sorry." The air was thick with the sound of my son's broken sobs. Brielle was frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. Her perfect plan had been undone by the very pawn she thought she controlled. And then, the dining room door opened. Gavin Shue stepped into the room. He walked calmly to the table and, without a word, placed a small, framed photograph on the polished wood, directly in front of Prudence Kincaid. It was a picture of a smiling young man in a graduation cap and gown. Prudence stared at the photo, and a guttural sound of pure horror escaped her lips. "Mrs. Kincaid," Gavin said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of years of cold fury. "Or should I use the name you went by back then? The one you used when you ran that fraudulent home care service? Do you remember my son?" That was it. That was the final blow. Prudence Kincaid didn't just cry, she shattered. A wail of guilt and terror tore from her throat, and she slumped forward in her chair, a broken woman, her empire of deceit and revenge reduced to ashes around her. The vanilla candles flickered. The smell, once pleasant, was now cloying and sick. The trial was over. The morning after the storm broke, I drove. With Rowan beside me in the passenger seat and Derek silent as a stone in the back, we left the manicured lawns and simmering tensions of Maple Ridge behind. We headed east, toward the mountains, chasing the first pale hints of dawn. An hour later, the pavement gave way to gravel. The road narrowed, winding through a dense forest of pine and cedar that smelled of damp earth and clean, cold air. We finally pulled up to a small, unassuming log cabin nestled in a grove of trees overlooking the steel-blue expanse of Arrow Lake. A thin veil of mist hovered over the water, kissed by the rising Sunday. This was Arthur's sanctuary, not a monument to his wealth, but a refuge from it. We got out of the car. The only sounds were the crunch of our shoes on the gravel and the distant, lonely call of a loon across the water. Derek looked around, his face etched with a confusion that went deeper than his shame. He had only been here a few times as a boy. To him, this was just another asset, a line item on a balance sheet he'd tried to claim. "I've reviewed the title for this property, Loretta," Rowan said, his lawyerly habits dying hard even in the face of such profound peace. "It's in the trust, but there's a permanent easement I've never seen before, a usufruct." I smiled faintly, breathing in the crisp morning air. "That's why we're here." I led them onto the small, sturdy dock that stretched out over the water. The mist was beginning to burn away, revealing the majestic, tree-lined shore opposite us. "This cabin is worth about $420,000 on paper," I began, my voice quiet, letting the landscape absorb the words. "But its real value can't be measured. It's built on a debt of honor." I looked at my son. His eyes were fixed on the water, but I knew he was listening. "Years before you were born, your father was in a terrible accident. A logging truck on a mountain road. His car went over an embankment. He was pinned, bleeding, and the car was threatening to catch fire. One man stopped, a man named Sam Galloway. He pulled your father from the wreckage moments before it was engulfed in flames. He saved his life." I paused, letting the story settle. Sam and his wife Clara never had much. They lived a simple life. Arthur tried to give them money, but Sam would never take a dime. He said, "You don't put a price on a man's life." They became our dearest friends. Sam passed away a few years after your father did. Rowan nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "So, your father found a different way to repay the debt," I continued. "He bought this land and built this cabin, and he put a clause in the deed, a usufruct. It's a legal right that grants Clara, and her children after her, the right to use and enjoy this property for the rest of their lives. We are the owners, but they are the keepers. It is their home to use whenever they wish. We are merely stewards. I turned to face Derek fully. The sun was breaking over the treetops now, casting a warm glow on his pale face. Your father's real assets weren't the stocks, the bonds, or the real estate, Derek, I said, my voice soft but firm. His greatest assets were the people he cherished, the loyalties he kept, the promises he honored. He knew that a legacy isn't what you own, it's what you owe to the people who made you who you are. Tears welled in Derek's eyes, but these were not the frantic tears of shame I'd seen last night. They were quiet tears of understanding. For the first time, he was seeing his father not as a titan of industry to be measured against, but as a man of principle. This place, I said, gesturing to the simple cabin, is not a financial instrument. It's a monument to gratitude. And that's how we're going to use it from now on. I looked from my son to my lawyer, my voice filled with a purpose that felt new and exhilarating. I've spoken with Sister Helene. We're going to start a project here. We're calling it the Weekend Kitchen. Once a month, we'll use this cabin as a base. We'll cook and deliver hot, nourishing meals to families in the more remote communities out here, people the city food banks often miss. We're going to turn this asset into an action. The sun was fully above the trees now, its light dancing on the surface of the lake. The last of the mist had vanished. In its place was a perfect, piercing clarity. The cabin wasn't a prize to be won or a property to be defended. It was a purpose waiting to be fulfilled. And in that moment, standing on that dock, I felt a sense of wealth that no bank account could ever hold. A week after our trip to the cabin on Arrow Lake, I met Derek for coffee. We chose a small, quiet cafe downtown, a neutral territory that belonged to neither of us. There were no ghosts of family dinners or business deals in that room, just the low hum of an espresso machine and the smell of roasted coffee beans. It was a place for new beginnings. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the corner, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked smaller somehow. The false bravado he had worn for years, the desperate imitation of his father's confidence, had been stripped away. What was left was something quieter, more sober. He stood when he saw me, a gesture of respect he hadn't shown in years. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "Derek." I sat down opposite him. I didn't waste time with small talk about the weather or the quality of the coffee. The time for that was over. I placed a folder on the table between us. It wasn't a weapon, like the legal documents had been. It was a tool. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice calm and measured, "about you, about us, about what comes next." He said nothing, his eyes fixed on the folder. "Last week, at the cabin, I told you about your father's legacy. It wasn't about money. It was about honor. This," I tapped the folder, "is about yours. It's your chance to build one." He finally met my gaze. The guilt was still there, but it was mingled with a sliver of hope. "This is not a punishment, Derek," I said, making sure he understood. "The disinheritance clause was the punishment. That was the consequence. This is the cure. This is a map. I can't walk the road for you, but I can give you a map to get back on it." I opened the folder and slid the top page toward him. It wasn't written in dense legalese. It was a simple 2-page document I had written myself. At the top, in plain, clear type, it read, "The Rebirth Agreement." He began to read. I gave him the silence to do so. The agreement had 2 primary conditions, each with several clear, non-negotiable steps. The first section was titled Restitution. "The loan from Arthur's Legacy Ventures has been paid off," I explained as he read. "I paid it. Consider it the last bailout you will ever get. This section outlines your repayment plan, not to the shell company, but to the family trust. You will get a job, any job. You will provide me with your pay stubs. 50% of your net income every 2 weeks will be transferred to the trust until the debt is repaid in full. There is no interest. There is only the principal and your commitment." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the lines. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. "The second section," I continued, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its firmness, "is titled Recovery. This was the part that truly mattered. You will enroll in therapy, Immediately, you will attend weekly sessions with a certified financial therapist to address the behaviors that led you here. You will also join a support group, like Debtors Anonymous. You will provide me with confirmation of your attendance. This is not a suggestion, Derek. It's the cornerstone of this entire agreement. I leaned forward. The money is secondary. This is about understanding why. Why you felt the need to live a life you couldn't afford. Why you were so susceptible to someone like Brielle. Why your father's shadow felt like a place you had to escape, rather than a place you could learn from. Until you fix the foundation, any house you try to build will crumble. He finished reading and looked up, his eyes clear. I love you, Derek, I said, and every word was true. But I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. The blind, unconditional support is over. That was my mistake. It was my form of enabling. From now on, my love comes with steel discipline. It comes with expectations. It comes with holding you accountable, because that's what you deserve. You deserve a mother who believes you are strong enough to fix this. He stared at the paper for a long time. The quiet hum of the cafe was the only sound. He was at a crossroads, and the choice was his alone. He could walk away, take his $1, and disappear into a life of debt and shame. Or he could pick up the pen. He reached for the pen I had placed on the table. His hand was steady. There was no hesitation. He uncapped it, and with a firm, decisive stroke, he signed his name on the line at the bottom. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He slid the signed agreement back to me. "Okay, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it was the strongest I'd heard it in years. "Okay." I nodded, took the document, and placed it back in my folder. There were no tears, no dramatic hugs. It wasn't a moment for that. It was a moment of quiet, solemn commitment. "Good," I said, closing the folder. I stood up to leave. "Your first therapy session is scheduled for Tuesday. The details are in the folder I'm mailing you. This is your first day, Derek." He nodded, a flicker of something new in his eyes. It wasn't happiness. It was resolve. And for the first time in a long, long time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope for my son. 6 months. That's how long it takes for a season to turn, for a deep wound to scar over, and for a new life to take root. The rains of that terrible autumn had given way to a brilliant Seattle spring. The garden I had neglected was now rioting with colored tulips and daffodils standing in proud, defiant rows. The house no longer felt like a fortress to be defended. It felt like it was breathing with me. I was on the front porch, enjoying the unseasonably warm sun on my face, when the mail carrier came by. In the stack of bills and catalogs was a single, hand-addressed envelope. The handwriting was hesitant but clean, a script I hadn't seen since Derek was a boy, before he'd tried to grow up too fast. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside were 2 things, a letter and a check. The check was from a regional bank I didn't recognize, drawn on a new account. It was for a modest sum, but it felt heavier than a brick of gold. It was the first installment. The letter was 1 single page. "Mom," it began, "there aren't words to say I'm sorry. Not the right ones, anyway. So I'm going to try to show you instead. I got a job at a landscaping company. It's hard work. It feels good. I'm going to my meetings. I'm talking to my therapist. I'm finally being honest, mostly with myself. This check isn't much, but it's the first of many. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm trying to earn it, step by step. Derek." I folded the letter and held it, and the check, to my chest. It was the most valuable thing I owned. Just as I was about to go inside, a sleek, dark sedan pulled up to the curb. Leo Vance got out. He looked different than he had in Rowan's office. The hungry, ambitious edge was still there, but it was tempered by a new maturity. He carried a small gift bag. "Mrs. Vale," he said, walking up the path. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Leo. Please." He handed me the bag. Inside was a jar of expensive local honey. "A peace offering of sorts," he said with a wry smile. We sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking softly. "I came to apologize," he said, getting straight to the point. "For my part in the deception." I looked at him, confused. "You mean the phone call? Leo, you were acting on our instruction." "Not just that," he said, looking out at the street. After Brielle made her offer, I kept the line of communication open. I let her think I was seriously considering it. I fed her bits and pieces of misinformation, subtly exaggerating our financial weaknesses, hinting that you were emotionally fragile. I made her think I was a snake she could charm. I wanted her to be so overconfident, so sure of her victory, that she wouldn't see the real trap coming. He finally looked at me, his expression earnest. It worked. But I did it on my own. I didn't tell you or Rowan the full extent of it. I was so sure I could outplay her. I went off book. It was arrogant, and it was a risk I shouldn't have taken without your consent. I'm sorry. I was silent for a moment, processing it. This young, brilliant man had fought a covert war on my behalf. Sometimes, Leo, I said softly, you have to fight fire with fire. You just have to be careful not to get burned. I accept your apology. And your honey. He smiled, a genuine look of relief on his face. After he left, I went to the garage and came back with a small, rectangular object. It was a simple pine board, with words carefully burned into the wood. I hung it from 2 small hooks on the post of my porch. It read, Weekend Kitchen, 11 a.m. A quiet declaration. A few minutes later, Gavin's old pickup truck rumbled up the street. He got out, carrying a neat bundle of kindling tied with twine. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward the sign, a look of deep approval in his eyes, and stacked the wood by my front door for our next trip to the cabin. He was soon followed by Sister Helene, who came bearing a basket overflowing with fresh vegetables from the hospital's charity garden. The 3 of us stood there on the porch, bathed in the warm afternoon Sunday. Gavin, my steadfast shield. Sister Helene, my moral compass. Well, Sister Helene said, eyeing the firewood and the vegetables. Looks like we're almost ready for another run. Just need the bread, Gavin grunted with a smile. And I laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that seemed to rise up from my very soul. The sound filled the air, bright and clear. I reached out and touched the brass doorknob of my front door. It wasn't cold, like it had been on that rainy night. It was warm from the Sunday. From inside, I could smell the faint, delicious scent of the bread I had started baking that morning. The house wasn't a property. It wasn't an asset. It was an extension of me, filled not with ghosts and grievances, but with friendship, purpose, and the promise of a meal to be shared. I was finally, truly, home. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.